Hello again. Today I want to introduce volume 1 and actually also volume 2. There's volume 2, sorry, of SATOW's retirement diaries from 1912 to 1920, so covering the period of the First World War. I shall read the very short preface, and then I shall read Professor T.G. Otte's foreword. Okay, so first of all, the preface, which I wrote. The project of making the important and valuable diaries and letters of Sir Ernest Satow, PC, GC, MG, deposited by the terms of his will after his death in the then Public Record Office, now the National Archives of the UK, more easily available in book and digital form to scholars, students, and the general reading public, began with The Diaries and Letters of Sir Ernest Mason Satow, 1843 to 1929, a scholar diplomat in East Asia, Edwin Mellon Press, 1998. It has since become a time-consuming but most absorbing and rewarding life work. This book, the 1912 to 1920 Diaries, is the penultimate section. Throughout this period, Satow, and I always pronounce him with a long A as in father, Satow was resident in the small town of Otte, St. Mary in Devon. He began to reside at Beaumont House in 1907 and died there in 1929. The diaries continue until 31st December 1926, which is the last known entry. At least it is the last one deposited in the National Archives. In due course, I intend to publish the final part, 1921 to 1926. A word on this pronunciation, Satow. I make a point of that because the Japanese call him Sato and then get confused as to whether he was British or Japanese. And of course, he was definitely British. Sato, of course, is a common Japanese family name. Okay. By publishing these diaries, I am attempting to deepen and enhance our knowledge of what it was like to live in rural England about 100 years ago and during World War I specifically. This is a major missing piece in the jigsaw puzzle of Satow's interesting and important life, which is mainly associated with his diplomatic career in Japan and China. This book should interest Asian and British readers, including local historians of Devon, and I hope it will increase awareness of Satow in Britain. I am very grateful once again to the distinguished diplomatic historian, Professor Thomas Otte of the University of East Anglia, for his foreword. All and any errors in this book, including any misreading of Satow's handwriting, are mine. Ian Ruxton, Kyushu Institute of Technology, April 2018. And now I shall read Professor Otte's foreword. Trained to observe and to report accurately, diplomats often turn to literary work on leaving their profession. Sir Ernest Satow followed this well-beaten path. His writings, however, were of a more scholarly nature. Already while still a serving diplomat, he had published a series of learned papers on mostly Oriental philology, early Japanese history, and the history of Christian missionaries in East Asia. His French colleague in Tokyo, indeed, thought him un peu livresque, a bit bookish. And as his diary for the years 1912 to 1920 shows, Satow lost little of his bookish habits during his retirement years in the Devonshire town of Otte, St. Mary. As during his professional life, so in retirement, Satow remained somewhat reserved. His diary entries rarely offer a glimpse of his inner self. His two sons, Takeda Eitaro, later Alfred Satow, and Takeda Hisayoshi, make fleeting appearances, but only the cognoscenti will recognize them as his offspring, for Satow does not tell. The diaries are sparse in detail and impersonal in tone, yet they evoke the image of the balmy Edwardian afternoon so brilliantly captured in the novels of Henry James. The pace of life is delectably sedate. There seem to be few troubles ahead. We find the retired diplomat, when not rambling across the hills and along the lanes of the Devon countryside, or paying social calls on the gentry of the neighborhood, indulging his passion for plant collecting and gardening. Occasional reviews of books on China and East Asian affairs for the literary magazine, The Athenaeum, that mirror of Victorian and Edwardian culture provided for intellectual diversion. Visits to London or to Oxford kept him in touch with events in politics and academia. Trips to the Fries outside Bristol and the Riets in the Scottish borders with old friends. Given his previous experience with consular courts, it was perhaps not surprising that he sat on the magistrate's bench. We catch glimpses of the provincial music scene, and we see SATOW involved in local government and church affairs. He was also prominent in the Conservative-affiliated Primrose League and the National Service League, a somewhat fringe pressure group advocating compulsory military service. On his 69th birthday, he reflected that he was contented with his life, a rare personal observation, and that he had just enough public work of different sorts to give me occupation. There were few signs of impending danger. Industrial unrest, the great coal strike of 1912, zigzagged like lightning across the horizon, and so did the two Balkan wars in that same year, and the following. During this time, SATOW, in a sense, reinvented himself from an Oriental scholar into one of the foremost authorities on the practice of diplomacy and certain aspects of international law. European diplomatic history afforded him the keenest pleasure now. Already in 1908, he had given the Reed Lecture, that's capital R-E-D-E, Reed Lecture at Cambridge on that subject. Now he produced papers on the law of the sea, and he was engaged in researching a historical case study, the Silesian Loan and Frederick the Great, which combined diplomatic history and the history of international law. During this time, he also began writing the work that was to become a lasting monument to his scholarly pursuit, A Guide to Diplomatic Practice, referred to since its publication in 1917, and now in its 7th edition with an 8th in press, I understand, simply as SATOW. The guide was referred to as SATOW. Guide to Diplomatic Practice, that is. Into this happy scene, the First World War struck like the proverbial bolt from the blue. Curiously, SATOW and his brother, that's Sam SATOW, had visited Germany in early June 1914 to see their cousin Lysinka Elizabeth SATOW in the Harz Mountains. All seemed well then. The effects of the war were felt with perhaps less immediacy in Ottery than elsewhere in the country. As one of the local notables and as chairman from April 1915 to April 1916 of the Ottery St. Mary Urban District Council, SATOW had to implement war-related government measures and emergency regulations. He played a prominent role in efforts to encourage men to enlist and those who remained at home to subscribe to government war bonds. He also sat on the board of selection after the introduction of military conscription in 1916. As for his scholarly pursuits, the appearance of the Silesian Loan was much delayed by the outbreak of the war, and work on the Guide to Diplomatic Practice acquired greater urgency. The end of the war, the 1919 peace treaties, and the subsequent emergence of the League of Nations brought fresh material for further scholarly treatises, albeit on a smaller scale. Such work provided intellectual stimulation but brought little material reward, an experience common to many academic writers. Research expenses had outweighed the net receipts for the Silesian Loan and the Guide, as SATOW observed ruefully on May the 17th, 1918, so that I am still out of pocket on the whole. It was not indeed until the spring of 1920 that he had achieved a profit on his literary work. By that time, he had turned his mind to the history of his own family, whose chronicle he was to publish privately in 1925. And so we leave SATOW on New Year's Eve 1920, counting his expenses over the year, reflecting on the number of friends lost during the past 12 months, as he always did. He always listed them up in his diary at the end of the year, but still in a hopeful frame of mind. Thank you very much for listening. This paperback is available from lulu.com and from Amazon. It's 2 volumes, 1912 to 1920, although you can buy them separately. And they're also on Amazon as Kindles, I believe. Okay, thank you very much. See you again soon.